Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 103. Chapter 103. In 1808, the Emperor Alexander went to Erft for a fresh interview with the Emperor Napoleon, and in the upper circles of Petersburg there was much talk of the grandeur of this important meeting. In 1809, the intimacy between the world's two arbiters, as Napoleon and Alexander were called, was such that when Napoleon declared war on Austria, a Russian corps crossed the frontier to cooperate with our old enemy Bonaparte against our old ally, the Emperor of Austria, and in court circles, the possibility of marriage between Napoleon and one of Alexander's sisters was spoken of. But besides considerations of foreign policy, the attention of Russian society was at that time keenly directed on the internal changes that were being undertaken in all the departments of government. Life, meanwhile, real life, with its essential interest of health and sickness, toil and rest, and its intellectual interest in thought, science, poetry, music, love, friendship, hatred, and passions, went on as usual, independently of and apart from political friendship or enmity with Napoleon Bonaparte, and from all the schemes of reconstruction. Prince Andrew had spent 2 years continuously in the country. All the plans Pierre had attempted on his estates, and constantly changing from one thing to another had never accomplished, were carried out by Prince Andrew without display and without perceptible difficulty. He had in the highest degree a practical tenacity which Pierre lacked, and without fuss or strain on his part, set things going. On one of his estates, the 300 serfs were liberated and became free agricultural laborers, this being one of the first examples of the kind in Russia. On other estates, the serfs' compulsory labor was commuted for a quit rent. A trained midwife was engaged at Boguchavaro at his expense, and a priest was paid to teach reading and writing to the children of the peasants and the household serfs. Prince Andrew spent half his time at Bald Hills with his father and his son, who was still in the care of nurses. The other half he spent in the Boguchavaro cloister, as his father called Prince Andrew's estate. Despite the indifference to the affairs of the world he had expressed to Pierre, he diligently followed all that went on, received many books, and to his surprise noticed that when he or his father had visitors from Petersburg, the very vortex of life, these people lagged behind himself, who never left the country, and knowledge of what was happening in home and foreign affairs. Besides being occupied with his estates and reading a great variety of books, Prince Andrew was at this time busy with a critical survey of our last 2 unfortunate campaigns, and with drawing up proposals for a reform of the army rules and regulations. In the spring of 1809, he went to visit the Razan estates, which had been inherited by his son, whose guardian he was. Warmed by the spring sunshine, he sat in the calash, looking at the new grass, the first leaves on the birches, and the first puffs of white spring clouds floating across the clear blue sky. He was not thinking of anything, but looked absent-mindedly and cheerfully from side to side. They crossed the ferry where he had talked with Pierre the year before. They went through the muddy village, past threshing floors and green fields of winter rye, downhill where snow still lodged near the bridge, uphill where the clay had been liquefied by the rain, past strips of stubble land and bushes touched with green here and there, and into a birch forest growing on both sides of the road. In the forest it was almost hot, no wind could be felt. The birches with their sticky green leaves were motionless, and lilac-colored flowers and the first blades of green grass were pushing up and lifting last year's leaves. The coarse evergreen color of the small fir trees scattered here and there among the birches was an unpleasant reminder of winter. On entering the forest, the horses began to snort and sweated visibly. Peter the footman made some remark to the coachman. The latter assented. But apparently the coachman's sympathy was not enough for Peter, and he turned on the box toward his master. "How pleasant is it, Your Excellency?" he said with a respectful smile. "What?" "It's pleasant, Your Excellency." What's he talking about? Thought Prince Andrew. Oh, the spring, I suppose, he thought as he turned around. Yeah, really, everything is green already. How early. The birches and cherry and alders, too, are coming out. But the oaks show no sign yet. Ah, here is one oak. At the edge of the road stood an oak. Probably 10 times the age of the birches that formed the forest. It was 10 times as thick and twice as tall as they. It was an enormous tree, its girth twice as great as a man could embrace, and evidently long ago some of its branches had been broken off and its bark scarred. With its huge, ungainly limbs sprawling unsymmetrically, and its gnarled hands and fingers, it stood an aged, stern, and scornful monster among the smiling birch trees. Only the dead-looking evergreen firs dotted about in the forest, and this oak refused to yield to the charm of spring, or noticed either the spring or the sunshine. Spring, love, happiness, this oak seemed to say. Are you not wary of that stupid, meaningless, constantly repeated fraud? Always the same, and always a fraud? There is no spring, no sun, no happiness. Look at those cramped dead firs, ever the same. And at me, too, sticking out my broken and barked fingers just where they have grown, whether from my back or my sides. As they have grown, so I stand, and I do not believe in your hopes and your lies. As he passed through the forest, Prince Andrew turned several times to look at that oak, as if expecting something from it. Under the oak, too, were flowers and grass, but it stood among them scowling, rigid, misshapen, and grim as ever. Yes, the oak is right, 1,000 times right, thought Prince Andrew. Let others, the young, yield afresh to that fraud, but we know life. Our life is finished. A whole sequence of new thoughts, hopeless but mournfully pleasant, rose in his soul in connection with that tree. During this journey he, as it were, considered his life afresh, and arrived at his old conclusion, restful in its hopelessness, that it was not for him to begin anything anew, but he must live out his life, content to do no harm, and not disturbing himself or desiring anything. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 103. I'll now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 103. Andrew's Oak. Change, the poet reminds us, is just the way it is. Things will never be the same. Existence is a fluid, raucous mess. Just a few pages ago, to take an example from our reading and the historical record, the Russians were at war with the French. Now Alexander and Napoleon are teaming up to do battle against Russia's former ally, Austria. At the high level of global geopolitics, then, it's clear that even things seemingly fixed are actually fluxed. Way down at the individual level, too, affairs are in an equally continuous state of metamorphosis. Prince Andrew, in a calm commitment to practical tenacity, has effected numerous changes on his estates. He has freed his serfs, for starters. In addition, he has provided them with a trained midwife and a priest to teach reading and writing to their children. He's also made countless alterations and improvements on his estates. And, despite presenting an indifferent attitude towards the world, he keeps abreast of news and current events, more so than even the well-connected city folk. Amid all this change, Andrew one day takes a trip to his Ryazan estates. It's there, among the blooming spring and under the cerulean sky of the expansive Russian countryside, that he finds an oak tree. Probably 10 times the age of the birches that formed the forest, it was 10 times as thick and twice as tall as they. It was an enormous tree, its girth twice as great as a man could embrace, and evidently long ago some of its branches had been broken off and its bark scarred. With its huge, ungainly limbs sprawling unsymmetrically, and its gnarled hands and fingers, it stood an aged, stern, and scornful monster among the smiling birch trees. Only the dead-looking evergreen firs dotted about in the forest, and this oak refused to yield to the charm of spring, or notice either the spring or sunshine. Prince Andrew can't ignore the oak and its provocative ugliness. He muses upon its meaning, concluding that he is the oak, a stark reminder that despite the surrounding fraudulent spring of excitement and vim, the truth is that all is helpless, and the only constants in life are old age and death. It's not just Andrew. Everyone is that oak tree. Each aging moment brings us closer to death and permanent oblivion. Along the way, events break our branches and scar our bark. That may sound pretty bad, but there is more than one way to climb a tree. We can also see Andrew's oak as a durable and different constant among all that is changing around it. His oak makes no judgment about the changes of the seasons, the privations of winter, nor the plenty of summer. It accepts the abuses of nature as the natural, unalterable way of things, and carries on. It is content, maybe even happy, to simply be an oak tree. Daily meditation. All these things which thou seest change immediately and will no longer be. And constantly bear in mind how many of these changes thou hast already witnessed. The universe is transformation. Life is opinion. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. All right, so that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 103. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are below. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 104. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.